Welcome to Coaching Deep Dives, presented by the Global Coach Collective. This is where evidence-based research meets practical application. And today we're exploring an insightful article about the psychology of performance and the transformative power of coaching.
Okay. The concept of vulnerability is often overlooked but holds great importance in understanding human emotions. You feel scared, putting yourself out there. Not exactly the most comfortable feeling.
Yeah, but the funny thing is what we're looking at today, these pieces from Harnessing Vulnerability, it actually says that vulnerability is a strength, especially for coaches.
Yeah, that's what really got me. What makes us most uncomfortable might be our hidden strength. It's counterintuitive, isn't it?
Seems like you'd want to hide your flaws to seem strong, but actually the research shows that when you're open about what you don't know, people trust you more. And trust is the foundation of any coaching relationship.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. When we're talking about being vulnerable, how much are we really talking about here? Where's the line between being open and just oversharing?
That's a great question. And Dr. Williams and Dr. Moser actually talk about that. It's not about telling everyone everything or airing all your dirty laundry. It's more about just being authentic in a way that feels safe for you.
So it's a process, not just like a one-time thing.
Exactly. You don't have to do everything at once. Think of it like gradually letting light into a dark room. You wouldn't just throw open all the curtains at once, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Control the light, so to speak, so that makes it feel a lot less scary. But Dr. Williams also mentions courage a lot. What's the connection between vulnerability and courage? It takes a lot of courage to be your true self, especially when you know that you aren't perfect.
Dr. Williams uses these really famous examples Lincoln, Mandela, Mother Teresa.
Wow, yeah. People we tend to put on a pedestal. It's easy to forget they had their struggles too.
And I think that's a good reminder. These people weren't perfect, but they were willing to be seen, even with their flaws, and that's part of what made them so impactful. They connected with people on a human level.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is where it gets really interesting to me. This idea that vulnerability can actually help you find your purpose.
I don't quite get that. How does talking about my insecurities suddenly help me figure out what I should be doing with my life?
It's not as big of a jump as you might think. Vulnerability helps you understand yourself better. When you're vulnerable, you start to see yourself more clearly, the good and the bad. And in those maybe not so perfect parts, that's where you often find your purpose. It's less about inspiration and more about understanding, really understanding what drives you.
I see. So those weaknesses, those are like clues almost.
Yeah, exactly. They're not things to be ashamed of. And Dr. Williams actually tells the story about a coach who didn't want to be vulnerable. They thought it would make them look weak, but when they finally did open up, it actually made them a better coach, and they rediscovered their passion for the work.
So it's like we were saying before that admitting you don't know everything can actually make you more trustworthy. Maybe that's what happened with that coach.
Totally. And it shows that the more we acknowledge our own struggles, the better we can connect with other people. It makes us human. And that shared humanity is how we build real connections.
Okay, that's so interesting. Speaking of connection, Dr. Moser really emphasizes how important vulnerability is for building strong coaching relationships.
It sounds like we're talking about more than just like being friendly, right? It's more like I don't know, like a deeper level, like you're really connecting with the other person.
Exactly. It creates an environment where both people can actually grow. It's about being open about what you want to achieve, and the coach, they have to be vulnerable too.
That's important. I like how Dr. Williams and Dr. Moser gives you actual things you can do to bring vulnerability into coaching, like listening, giving feedback, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those are all ways to build that connection. And it's not just a nice thing to have, it's important. When you feel like someone really gets you, you're more likely to take risks and try new things, and that's how you reach your goals.
Okay, but what about when things get a little tough? What if someone shares something really heavy, something you're not really equipped to deal with?
As a coach, that's where training comes in. And just knowing where your boundaries are, you have to be able to gently steer the conversation back to a place that's safe for everyone. Vulnerability is important, but it's not an excuse to just dump all your problems on someone.
So it's about finding that balance between being open and knowing when to take a step back.
Exactly. It's a back and forth, sharing, holding back, pushing boundaries, but also respecting them. And communication is so important through all of that.
So being honest about your limits. Hey, I'm here for you, but that feels a little too personal right now.
Yeah, exactly. That honesty is how you navigate vulnerability in a healthy way. Both people feel respected, and that makes a relationship stronger. Which it makes me think about something we talked about earlier, the connection between vulnerability and purpose. I think we should go back to that for a second.
Yeah, honestly, that's the part I've been thinking about the most. How does being vulnerable help you figure out your purpose? Seems like it should be the other way around. Shouldn't I focus on my strengths and goals, not my weaknesses?
Here's the thing. Sometimes your passions and values, they're hiding in those vulnerable places. When you acknowledge those fears and imperfections, you start to understand what really matters to you deep down. So it's like those fears, they're actually like pointing you in the right direction.
Exactly. Think about it. What are you most afraid of messing up? What keeps you up at night? The things we're most afraid of are often the things we care about the most. They're like our deepest desires to make a difference.
Wow, that's mind blowing. So instead of running from our fears, we can actually use them to fuel our purpose.
Yes, that's the power of vulnerability. It turns those weaknesses into strengths, anxieties into motivation. It's about embracing everything, the good and the bad, and using it all to move forward.
I'm really starting to see it now. But how do we actually make this happen?
Dr. Williams mentions a coach who they found their purpose again after being vulnerable. How can we?
How can we do that?
It starts with looking inward, really thinking about your fears, your doubts, what you want, asking yourself the hard questions. What am I really passionate about? Or what do I want to leave behind? And remember, this is a process. It's not like you just figure it out overnight.
Okay, so get curious about those uncomfortable feelings, the stuff we usually try to ignore. And then what? How do we actually do something with those insights?
That's where a good coach can help. They can help you take those insights, connect them to your values, and turn them into actual goals. It's like creating a roadmap, but a roadmap that's true to who you are, to your purpose.
And that's where connection comes back in, right? That trust and vulnerability create the space to do that deep work.
Absolutely. Vulnerability helps you connect. Connection builds trust, and trust helps you find your purpose. And it's not just about the person being coached, the coach grows too. Seeing someone else change, it reminds you why you do what you do. It can bring back your own passion. This is also fascinating. We've gone from being scared of vulnerability to seeing it as this powerful tool for growth, connection, even like facing those hidden parts of ourselves. It's been quite the journey, and it really shows how complex and powerful this whole idea of vulnerability is.
Absolutely. But before we go too deep into the theory, I want to talk about some real world stuff. Dr. Williams has these specific strategies for building connection and coaching.
Can we get into those?
Sure, I think those strategies can really help us put all of this into practice. The first one is about encouraging openness.
Seems pretty simple. What does that actually look like in a coaching session?
It's about creating a space where both people feel safe to share what they're thinking and feeling without being judged. It could be things like listening closely, asking open ended questions, just like making the other person feel heard and understood.
So it's not just about listening to the words, it's about creating that feeling of acceptance.
Yeah, got it. The next one is setting clear goals.
Why is that important when we're talking about vulnerability? Having clear goals, especially when you're dealing with tough emotions and stuff, it gives you a sense of direction.
It's like a compass, it helps you stay on track without goals. You can get lost in your feelings and forget what you're working towards, and it probably helps both people feel like they're in it together, right? It's not just one person spilling their guts. It's like they're working together towards something.
Okay. Dr. Moser also mentions that the coach needs to be vulnerable too. We talked about that before, but I'd love to hear more about how that works.
Thanks. In a real coaching situation, it's practicing what you preach. It might mean sharing your own stories that relate to what the other person's going through, or admitting when you're not sure about something, or being open to feedback saying, hey, I don't know everything. It shows that you're human.
Yeah, you're not perfect. I bet that makes a big difference for the person you're coaching.
Okay, last strategy. Giving constructive feedback. How does that fit in with vulnerability?
Feedback, when it's done, can actually be a really vulnerable thing. It's about being honest, but also kind, helping someone see where they can improve, but without making them feel bad. So it's like a gift, not a criticism.
I get it, but it sounds like it takes a lot of skill, especially when you're talking about sensitive topics.
Definitely, you have to be really careful with your words and how you say them, and you have to be in the right headspace yourself. Feedback is only helpful when it comes from a place of caring. You want to help the other person grow.
This is all so much to think about. We've really come a long way, haven't we?
We started out thinking vulnerability was scary, and now we see it as this amazing thing that helps us grow, connect, find our purpose, even face our darker sides.
It's been quite a journey. It really highlights how powerful vulnerability is. It's not just one thing, it's like this whole world of possibility.
Okay, so we've talked about all these good things about vulnerability, but what about the risks? Letting your guard down, it can be dangerous, right?
That's true. And Dr. Williams and Dr. Moser actually talk about that. It's not always easy. You have to be smart about it. Think about when it's okay to be vulnerable and with who. And you need to have boundaries.
So you're saying you shouldn't be vulnerable with everyone all the time?
Yeah, exactly. You don't tell everyone your secrets. You have to choose who you trust. Same with vulnerability. You got to be careful who you open up to.
Okay, that makes sense, but what about when it does go wrong?
What if you open up to someone and they judge you or use it against you?
Yeah, that can happen. Not everyone is going to handle your vulnerability the right way. But honestly, if someone judges you for being real, maybe they're not someone you want in your life anyway.
So it's like a test almost. It shows you who your real friends are.
Yeah, and I know it hurts when someone rejects you or betrays your trust, but it can also teach you a lot. You learn who to trust and how to protect yourself.
Okay, I can see that. But how do you get over it when it does happen? How do you keep believing in vulnerability when it feels like it backfired?
It takes time. Be kind to yourself. And sometimes it helps to talk to someone you trust, like a therapist or a coach. Try to see it as a learning experience, not like you did something wrong. Remember, being vulnerable is brave, it's not weak.
That's a good point. It's even when it's scary, it still takes strength to be vulnerable. It shows that you're not afraid to be yourself. And that's really inspiring, I think. It's not about being perfect, it's about accepting who you are, flaws and all.
Absolutely. And that's what we've been talking about this whole time, the power of vulnerability, not just for coaching, but for everything.
So, as we wrap up, what's the one thing you want people to take away from this deep dive?
I want them to see vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness. It helps you connect with people, be more courageous, and find your purpose. And remember, it's a journey. Be patient, celebrate the small wins, and just try to be yourself. That's what matters.
I love that. As you go about your week, think about this. What's one thing you can be more open about, even if it's a little scary? Remember, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. And it's about connecting with other people.
Before we close, remember to visit Global Coach Cooperative, where you'll find the full article discussed in today's episode, additional resources on performance psychology, and our complete library of coaching research and practice guides. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Coaching Deep Dives, where we transform coaching scholarship into actionable insights. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into vulnerability.